Every
All right, I think I have it. Did you get a message saying we were recording now? Yeah. Okay, so we are recording. So then we can also just share. I can put the video on YouTube and we can share it that way because
Awesome.
The time zone, etc., doesn't always work for everyone. But thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to talk through our questions. And I have a research assistant who's in my class who is helping to facilitate in the other room. And so she knows to make sure everyone puts questions in the chat for us too. So
awesome.
So hopefully we'll get some good questions either from them or if anyone else joins.
Okay.
You're in Colorado, right? Are you
Yeah.
still? Okay.
Yeah, I'm in Colorado, so it's kind of gloomy here today. We're in that time of the year now where our temperatures go up and down and up and down. So
yeah, we have been too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually the warmest we've had since like September today, maybe. It's like 80 something.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So we just jumped up, but.
And then it'll probably snow next week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like, for Easter on Sunday, it'll be like a thunderstorm and 50 or.
Of course.
We'll see. But Colorado's a nice place to be, though.
Yeah.
You've jumped around a bit too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've had a little taste of everything, I think, along the way. Grew up in Chicago and lived in DC and Houston for a little bit before we finally settled out here in the mountains.
Yeah. Yeah. My daughter-in-law's in Colorado and they moved at the sort of beginning of the pandemic there. So we've been meaning to get out and finally, I think, are going to next month because.
Awesome.
It's finally, at this point, we're just traveling, I think, more and more because
right.
It's never going to end. So.
Right. We might as well learn to live with it, I think.
Yeah. Well, this class who's watching today too, it's a learning abroad class here at Rutgers. So we do a whole semester in the classroom surrounding a topic. And then we're actually going to Italy for a week in May altogether.
That sounds incredible. That's where we were supposed to, my husband and I have been waiting to go on our honeymoon. We got married in September of 2019, and we were going to go in the spring of 2020 to Italy. So we can't wait to finally go. So that sounds like an amazing opportunity to travel abroad.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty excited now that we're getting close. There's 24 students, me, and my husband's also faculty, so he goes with us. And also you just kind of need another group leader, I think, on these things just to just kind of distribute the work and stuff like that. There's always like little, glitches when you travel. So it's nice to have someone to problem solve with.
Exactly. And it'll give you more of an opportunity to enjoy the trip too.
Yeah. And then also I don't bug the students as much because I have someone to hang out with.
Yeah.
If I was like following them around, they wouldn't like it. So, I mean, we do a lot together every day and then they get time on their own, which I think they always seem to be grateful for. So, but I'm happy to report back if you rebook for Italy.
Yes, you'll have to tell me all the good places to go because that's the plan. I think we'll plan for the spring of next year to go because the weather will be good at that time. And hopefully by then we don't have to worry about any pandemic.
Yeah. I know, I feel like we keep saying that.
I know. Yeah, because what we were the most concerned about is I just had a coworker who I can't remember where he went, I think Germany or somewhere. And he got over there, spent a week and a half there, and then tested positive on the way back home. So he had to spend another week and a half there. And it's just like, that would not be fun.
Yes, well, my students and I will be talking about that during the second half of our class today. I am a little worried about that possibility as well. So we have some, I've talked with the university. We have some insurance from the university always for these things. So that helps in terms of concerns about cost, but the logistics will be less than optimal probably if it happens. It's not just a financial, concern. There's a lot to it. So,
well, fingers crossed everybody stays healthy and has a great trip, and none of that happens.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Or it'd be nice if I kind of am starting to feel like we should drop the requirement to test to return, because I'm not really sure we're keeping COVID out at this point, if
Right.
that's the objective.
Right. When it's already here. So,
Yeah, it seems
yeah,
to sneak in no matter what we do.
Right.
So
it's going to find a way.
that's kind of how all right, it looks like we have a few more people here. And like I said, my class is all watching from the one screen, and some of them tend to sort of trickle in. It's now that we're towards the end of the semester, we're all a little bit looser, I think. But it probably makes sense for us to get started, because an hour, I have a feeling, will fly by. So I'm gonna not share the screen, and then see, I think the best thing to do probably is to see if I can, let me see. I'm thinking if I can make you like a co-panelist, then it can be just the two of us. So let me see if that'll work. Okay, so you are now a co-host, and I think that should alter how we're seen, but hopefully it's as we're talking, people will see us. So,
okay, great.
So let me just start off with, before we even really do introductions, I just want to let people watching know sort of our format for today. So we titled this discussion, Body Dissatisfaction and Eating Disorders Among Boys and Men, Changing the Narrative. And we're gonna do this as mostly sort of a question and answer, pretty informal conversation. And so Jason and I have prepared for that, but then also the chat room is available for anyone watching who wants to drop a question there. And I will try to have that open and kind of keep my eye on it the whole time. But if we're not answering your question, feel free to drop them in there as soon as you have it, and we can return to questions towards the end. So you don't have to wait to ask, but if we don't answer right away, don't worry, we're looking. And it is set up this as a meeting, not as a webinar. So if people want to also unmute themselves or use the video later in this hour to actually talk with us, that's also possible. All right, so having said that, let me dive in. My name is Charlotte Markey. I am a professor of psychology and health sciences at Rutgers University. I have also recently co-authored a book called Being You, the Body Image Book for Boys, and it is now part of my personal and professional mission to try to spread awareness about body dissatisfaction and eating disorders among boys and men. And I'm really excited to be hosting this event and talking with Jason today in an effort to do so, but I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit more.
All right, so thanks so much. I am very excited to be joining everybody today. So my name is Jason Wood, and if you were listening in at the beginning, you probably figured out that I'm from Denver. So moved around the country a little bit, ended up here. Back in the summer of 2020, I was diagnosed with an unspecified eating disorder as well as anxiety and OCD. And I decided to get out there and to start sharing my story, because there weren't a lot of guys speaking up about their battles with body image or with the eating disorders. And I knew that, I had to get out there so other people didn't feel so alone. And I launched my blog, Orthorexia Bites, back in February of 2021. And then earlier this year, Starving for Survival came out. So my memoir, just over my entire journey, from the time that I was a kid up to the lessons that I'm now learning in recovery. So that's a little bit more about me. I know we'll probably dive into that a little bit more here moving along. But one question that, I had for you, Charlotte, right off the bat is, could you explain to us kind of how you came about writing your book about body image for boys?
Yeah, so I published a book in 2020 about body image for girls. And when I started that project, the editor I was working with told me kind of right off the bat, she said, I understand why you want to focus on girls. I understand that these are kind of gendered issues, but we need something for boys. And it was really cool because I felt the same way, but I thought it's just going to be hard to get a publisher. It's going to be hard to rally interest because we just don't talk about these issues as much when it comes to boys and men. So right from the beginning in pursuing these book projects, I had it set that, like I sent the girls' book off to the publisher and started working on the proposal for the boys' book, like the next week. And fortunately, my editor and my publishing team has been completely on board and really interested. And so people are surprised when I say a body image book for boys, but we've been talking about it, the people I work with, for years now. So it's like, of course, it doesn't seem like a surprise at all. But Jason, why did you decide to put, pen to paper? I read your whole book, as I told you. I found it really not just interesting and informative, but a really good read. You're a really excellent writer, I think, and really just courageous in putting yourself out there. But what was the moment or what motivated you to sit down and really do this?
Yeah, so it started off as a blog post. I thought I was just going to be writing a story or a memory from childhood in a blog post. And it just continued to grow organically into what would eventually become a 40,000 word manuscript. And what I realized is that there's so much power in storytelling. One of the greatest resources for me in my own treatment has been reading other people's stories, because I've been able to better understand my own story through doing that. And it was actually through reading my own story back to myself that I gained self-compassion. And it was a big turning point in my recovery. And that's why I realized that I had to take something I've always been passionate about, which is writing, and combine it with my newfound passion of advocacy and getting the word out about men and eating disorders. And I combined the two into one. And that's kind of how Starving for Survival was born. It was not a lot of planning went into it. It was like it just kind of snuck up on me and surprised me. And it was a whirlwind of a year getting it ready to be published and stuff. And I'm so glad that it's out there now to address the stigmas and the stereotypes around men and body image and eating disorders, because there are just so many misperceptions and misunderstandings. And I know that you probably came across many as you were researching for your book and as you've studied this topic. So I'd be curious to kind of hear, what were some of the common misperceptions and misunderstandings when it came to boys and body image that you discovered?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And even though I was familiar with the research literature, it still caught me by surprise when I talked to boys and young men in working on the project, is that it seems like a lot of boys and men have these concerns, but they don't articulate them the same way that I'm used to hearing girls and women talk about them. So they don't identify a body image concern as a body image concern. Like they'll say, they're going to the gym, or they're not eating carbs, or they're, whatever they're doing to their diet, or they're taking whatever supplements, but somehow they don't then say that's a body image concern. They certainly don't seem to think it's a problem. I don't know. I think that we've really done a disservice to a lot of people by kind of feminizing these issues for too long. And then a lot of boys and men just feel like they're irrelevant to them. And so they use kind of a different vocabulary almost to talk about it, was my finding. I don't know. How has how have misperceptions and misunderstandings impacted you in terms of maybe getting your book out there and also then, looking into treatment?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And thinking about it right off the bat, I was thinking about how much of my own rhetoric was masked in diet culture. So to me, I thought what I was doing was the right thing. I thought that as a guy, I'm supposed to go to the gym and lift these big weights and then focus on protein, 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 and all those other macros that it can't have those. And it was kind of justified in my mind because of diet culture and how we've normalized so much toxic rhetoric when it comes to good and bad foods and stuff like that. So I think one of the biggest things for me when it came to the misperceptions and the misunderstanding is I listened to the stereotypes for so long that, it's a female thing. That men don't battle eating disorders and men don't battle body image issues. And also I listened to the narrative coming from diet culture, and those two things combined prevented me from seeking help a lot earlier on. I was battling this condition for 15 plus years, but in my mind, these different things kept happening that were justifying what I was doing. So it didn't raise any real red flags for me. And I think the same was true for my inner circle, my friends, my family, even a lot of my medical professionals. The signs were there, but we weren't looking for them because of those misperceptions. So I think that played a major factor when it came to the actual breaking through and getting treatment. And then even with getting the book out there and the advocacy work that I do now, sometimes I'll be turned away from organizations because they say, oh, well, the number of guys that battle this is so small. We don't really have a big audience that would be able to relate to what you're saying. And I'm baffled by that, because to me, a life is a life. And eating disorders and body image, those are human issues. Those aren't women's issues. Those aren't men's issues. And it's really ironic because when I was publishing the book, in one of the Amazon marketplaces, eating disorders are listed under women's health issues. They're not even listed just under a general category. They're listed specifically under women's health. And I found that very, very odd. And it's one of those barriers that I've had. I had it when I seek treatment, and now I have it when I'm out there trying to spread the message. So I think it's because there are these different just origins of eating disorders. They can come from all different places. So I'm curious kind of what the research says and what you were able to find when it came to the origins of eating disorders, and maybe if they differ between the two genders.
Yeah, I think that, the origin is not necessarily entirely different across genders, right? It's just sort of the manifestation is a little bit different, more so in that, we know that there's real genetic risk factors. So individuals who actually experience eating disorders, it seems to run in families pretty strongly. And we also know that social factors are really important. So, being teased by a family member in early childhood can have really long lasting negative consequences, even if, and my class who's watching knows this, we've talked about this, even if the family member means it in an affectionate way. And in some cultures, that's really common to talk about people's body weight or fat sort of affectionately, but kids get the message pretty early on that it's socially undesirable. So even though my mom or dad is, calling me chubby or something, it's not what I want to hear. And of course the media, and as you said, diet culture is just everywhere. And I think it prevents so many of us from seeing what are truly maladaptive and disordered behaviors, right? That it's we've normalized doing all sorts of weird things when it comes to how we eat. How do you think through it in terms of your personal experiences, and what kinds of factors were most important for you?
Yeah. Before I answered that, I was thinking back, what would several generations back think about the current way that we talk about food? There would probably be people who are just shocked at some of the things that we say and we don't even think twice about now. So, but yeah, personal experiences, there were so many factors that contributed to my condition. And when I started treatment, I thought I was treating an eating disorder. I realized very quickly that there was a lot more that needed to be treated than just this eating disorder. It was about a lot more than food. And there was the loss of my parents at a young age. There was the bullying that I dealt with in school because I was overweight as a child. There was this overwhelming feeling of needing to be perfect and to overachieve at everything I did. And that played a big role when I started my first formalized dieting at Weight Watchers. When I joined Weight Watchers in high school, I had to overachieve. I had to perfect, and it was never enough. If I could trim a couple points here and there, it would mean I'd lose the weight faster. And I thought that would lead to praise. I thought it gave me self-worth because for so long I was so insecure about who I was because of the bullies or because of the trauma that I was going through in my life from losing my parents, and then the subsequent drug and alcohol abuse, or the arrest and eviction, homelessness, periods of homelessness. I went through all of those traumatic experiences feeling like I was nothing. I felt like a big failure and a big disappointment. And the one thing that I thought was giving me worth was my dieting, was my ability to control my body image or control what I ate. And even though everything else felt like it was spiraling out of control, at least it felt like I had one area of my life that I could in fact control. And I think those were all factors that contributed and became pretty much a perfect storm. In a lot of the speaking engagements that I do, I talk about that perfect storm, how it was a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I cannot pinpoint just one event or one specific thing that led to the eating disorder. There were multiple factors involved. So once I started treatment though, and it was like peeling back the layers of an onion. And it was just like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that these were parts of my life that needed attention until I started working with the therapist and working with my nutritionist and just really starting a treatment and recovery process. And along those lines, I know that you've got some fantastic statistics when it comes to recovery in general. So I'd be curious to hear more about those.
Well, unfortunately, they're not all fantastic. I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, not fantastic, but yeah, eye-opening.
I mean, they're eye-opening. Yeah, that's maybe the better word is, I think we started talking about this in my class last week. And I think, especially when it comes to anorexia, because there's so much restraint involved with anorexia, that people's become really physically unstable, right? And so it's shocking to people to learn that, about 20% of anorexic patients die, that this is, really serious. It's not something that people just can grow out of necessarily. Like you said, you suffered for so many years. And I think, we don't even really have great statistics on like binge eating or orthorexia, which is more what you experienced, because they're just newer diagnoses. I think they've been sort of neglected in the research literature. It's getting a lot better, but also just follow-up research takes so much time and so much money to see, like, when you start recovery, how are people doing a year later or 5 years later or 10 years later, because these are really chronic conditions. So there used to be this statistic, which I think is somewhat dated now, but it was like about 50% of people with an eating disorder just sort of go on to have like a chronic eating disorder. Like it's just sort of just like this, in between space of not really reaching recovery. And we used to think it was about 10% of people who experienced full recovery and like 10 or so percent who then actually died from their disorder. So those don't even add up to 100%. But the point being, just the chronic nature, I think, is not appreciated, and the really serious and deadly nature is not really appreciated. And what always amazes me in talking with people who've experienced eating disorders is just like how incredibly resilient our bodies are, that even if they're completely malnourished, or I know that you also worked out a lot, people will exercise on no fuel essentially.
Mhm.
And our bodies can just withstand so much until they can't, right? Like at some point, the body will start breaking down. And the thing is, we just don't know when we've hit that point. It's not always predictable. And this is why seeking help and seeking recovery is so important. And it's also, I know, just so important to get it as soon as possible, that the longer people experience these sorts of maladaptive habits and behaviors, the more at risk they are. And we don't want people to be suffering in the sort of in-between place where like they're stable enough to go on, but they can just maintain the disorder essentially. What do you think, really helped pull you out of this, bad place? What was essential to recovery for you?
Yeah, so for me, it was having those open and those honest conversations with my therapist and with my support team. And then, like I had mentioned earlier, gaining that self-compassion for myself. That was the one thing that I was truly lacking. I had such a low self-worth and just thought that I was a failure and a disappointment. And it was being able to learn to love myself that I was finally able to really start healing and to start the treatment process. And I'm so fortunate that my husband voiced his concerns that night and brought it to my attention, because one of the things that I share and that I've seen from working with other individuals who are recovering from an eating disorder is when you're in the middle of the storm, it's often hard to see how bad it really is. With my orthorexia, I thought I was actually in the best shape of my life. I would then be told by my nutritionist and by my doctor that, I'm on the brink of a sudden cardiac event and that my body was wasting away. But in my mind, I was convinced that I was doing the healthy thing, that I was taking care of myself. And it's one of those things that for the person that's going through it, they don't always realize just how bad it is. And I think I needed that voice of someone that I trusted, somebody I was close to voice those concerns and to get that out there and raise my attention to it. Because as soon as I heard it, I was like, I don't want to live like this anymore. You're right. Something has a control over me. This whole time I thought I was the one with the control. So it was facing the truth, as difficult as it was. And realizing just how bad it had gotten, because it was something that I had battled for 15 years, but it was especially true that first part of 2020. I was escalating. I was on the fast track to rock bottom at that point. And I don't know how much longer I would have been able to, sustain at that point, because it was never enough. No matter what I was doing, it was never healthy enough. I wasn't working out enough. And in some ways, hitting rock bottom over the infamous PETA incident, which you can read all about in the book, hitting rock bottom pretty much saved my life, because that was the opportunity where I was like, wow, it was that wake up call. And that made treatment possible. That made recovery possible, even though it was very difficult to find at times. So yeah, that's kind of where I was when it came to my treatment and to my recovery. And I lost my place here. I was rambling too much. So where
No,
were
it's okay. I wanted to ask you about, I love how you say in the book that at some point, I think as you're starting treatment, you came to appreciate that like you had dealt with some really difficult life circumstances. Like you had dealt truly with trauma, and you had dealt with it like the best you could, like the best you knew how to. You were a very young person when you experienced some of this trauma, and that kind of appreciating that allowed you to kind of stop being so hard on yourself, I think. And like you said, sort of just be more compassionate. But I just think that I don't know, something about that felt so profound when I read that part in your book, like this idea of just kind of forgiving ourselves more, like everyone, no matter what you're going through, and thinking like, well, obviously I did the best I could at the time. Like I didn't know any better, or, I guess I'm curious, if you came to that realization on your own, or is that in part due to your experiences in therapy? And we should even back up, if you don't mind me too, asking more about, I know you really had to seek out help in a way that frankly, I think most girls or women wouldn't have to. Like you really had to like kind of push for what you needed, which is so admirable, but also like just so upsetting to me. So
Yeah, I had to stumble across. I got lucky when it came to putting together my treatment team, but as a guy who was battling an eating disorder, I felt like I was on an island. For me, it was almost easier to ask for help than it was to find help. Once my doctor diagnosed me, my immediate response was, "What's next? Who do I talk to? Where do I go?" And he's like, "Oh, your situation's unique. I don't really know who to send you to. Why don't you go home and look online?" And it was just so bizarre to me, because if I was dealing with a heart condition, he'd send me to a heart specialist. If something was wrong with my foot, I'd be off to a podiatrist. But here I was getting diagnosed with an eating disorder, and he didn't know where to send me. And then I got home and I started looking at resources online, and every site you go to, it's females, it's young, skinny females, that stereotype that we have in mind. Plus, it's anorexia or bulimia. Individuals who are battling the other conditions, the other eating disorders like orthorexia, they really feel isolated when it comes to that. For a long time, I thought that the only two eating disorders you could have were bulimia or anorexia. I didn't know the other ones could even exist. And that made me question whether I was sick enough. I didn't want to take away resources from other people who I thought might be sicker than me. And like I'd mentioned, I was in the middle of the storm, so I didn't realize how sick I truly was. So I had to really convince myself that I was actually worthy of treatment, that I was sick enough for treatment. And it was through reaching out to a therapist that I began the treatment and the recovery process. But ironically, he had no experience dealing with clients with an eating disorder. He grew alongside of me throughout this entire journey. And he said, "I know that I can't necessarily speak to the eating disorder, but I can speak to everything that's contributing to it. And we can work through that and see where we go." And that's been key. That's been incredible for me, because it's been like an individualized approach to my treatment, where I don't feel like just another number. I don't feel like just another patient with eating disorder, or another patient with OCD. Like I feel like Jason whenever I talk to him. So that to me was just a very important part of the recovery process. But yeah, I got really lucky because I didn't know where to go. And I'm so glad that I made the decision to reach out to a therapist, because I don't know what treatment would have looked like for me had I not, reached out to him when I did.
yeah, I'm so grateful on your behalf. And I have to say, though, I usually will tell people who come to me and they want to talk about treatment options, like find a specialist, because not everyone who doesn't have expertise in eating issues or body image issues is always as helpful, I think, as
Mhm.
what you've experienced, right? And some of that comes from our own background, our own experiences in diet culture, and sometimes unknowingly, even therapists are
Yeah.
not always helpful, right? And so um, I sometimes will say like, well, make sure you find someone who really knows this area
Mhm.
and can really help you with these specific issues. But it sounds like you got really lucky, even not having someone with the particular expertise, someone who, like you said, was willing to kind of learn with you, which is not always the case. I think
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
One thing we're going to talk about during the second part of my class today, and that comes up just so often though, and I'm really interested in your take on this, is, what do you advise people do or say if they have concerns about a friend's either body dissatisfaction or eating related habits, or even their own. Like what advice do you have? What would you have been willing to hear, maybe, is one way to think about it.
Yeah, so one of the first things I would say is to watch your mouth. Watch the way that you talk about food, because oftentimes in the course of conversation, somebody would say something about, ooh, I'm going to be bad tonight and have dessert, or I'm going to cheat today and have this. And hearing that type of language just further justified what I was doing, because I couldn't separate myself. I would hear my friends say that, and I thought, okay, well, that's also what I'm thinking. The problem was I was obsessing over it. It was becoming an addiction, a fixation for me, but I couldn't differentiate that from a friend. So I figured, okay, well, we all just kind of have this weird relationship with food. So I think it's very, very important that we all watch the way that we talk about food and watch the way that we talk about ourselves. And that goes for if we have a friend or a family member who we're concerned about, we have to be mindful of that. We also, I think, have to have those uncomfortable conversations, as difficult as they may be. I am so glad, like I mentioned earlier, that my husband had that conversation with me, because that couldn't have been easy. That had to be a very scary conversation to initiate. And oftentimes, especially when it comes to us guys, we're just going to say, I'm fine, because that's what we're conditioned to do. So sometimes, especially if you're dealing with a male friend or a male family member, ask a couple times, come back to it several times. They might get irritated, but that's okay. You got to keep trying to initiate that conversation and break down that wall, as difficult and as uncomfortable as it might be. And I think that goes a really long way. And then if you have a friend or a family member who's active in recovery right now, you have to remember that it's a process. At the end of the day, there's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days. And it can be one of the most frustrating things for the individual going through it, as well as for the people around that individual. Because I wake up some days and I'm like, I got this. I'm recovered. I'm good to go. The next morning I'll wake up and I can barely face a banana without breaking out in a sweat or having anxiety about it. So it's one of those things where it's a roller coaster, and you have to be prepared as someone connected to an individual who's going through an eating disorder to take that ride with them and stay patient and trust the process, embrace the process, and eventually enjoy the process. What has become my mantra over the last 2 years now. So as difficult as it can be, it's very hard to support somebody going through an eating disorder, but it's also very hard to be the person going through an eating disorder. So at least if you can all unite together and watch what you're saying, be supportive, and stay the course.
Yeah, I think too, I think sometimes we underestimate the value of direct and compassionate language, and even just saying to someone, I'm worried about you, and trying to offer feedback that doesn't feel judgmental, right? I think sometimes we just don't have a lot of practice with this. And so if we're worried about someone, it can come out like we're mad at them or we're frustrated. And that may be a little piece of it, of course, but like underlying all of that is usually worry and concern and our own, maybe frustration that we don't know how to help. But it's easy for the person then to take that as like, you're mad at me, or for it to feel like a conflictual exchange. And so I do think sometimes just saying like, listen, I'm really concerned about you. Is there anything I can do? Even if they say no several times, like you pointed out, I think that does happen a lot. I think that it can be really valuable just to voice concern, right? I mean, you can't really get too mad at someone for caring about you or being concerned about you and saying, I care about you. I'm worried. You seem to be doing A, B, or C in a way that I don't know if that's really healthy. And then I also think it can be important, like you said, to follow up, to ask again. But, it's just, it can be hard. We're not good at like being direct like this. It can be really hard if it's someone you're close to. And it's also okay to pull in like a support person if it's like another friend or a parent figure, or, depending on your age, who's involved, who you live with. because you don't want to just ignore it, right? That doesn't help anyone.
No. No, and you want to be able to find that balance too, because you want to express how what they're going through is impacting you, but at the same time, you don't want that conversation to be all about you. But then again, you don't want to be too direct and make the other person, or the person that's going through it, feel like they're being attacked and put on the spot.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
got to be able to find that balance of looking at the situation from a holistic approach, and not necessarily maybe even pointing out one specific behavior or one specific meal where it happens. Take that very general overview approach. And I think that can help break down some of those defenses that come up, because I know for me, I had that wall up for a very long time.
I think too, it can just be so hard to like, even if someone approaches you or you approach someone, it's like, then what is the next step? As you were saying, it's like you talk to a healthcare provider, it's like, well, even, that person wasn't sure, like, what exactly should you do next? It's more complicated than just going to a podiatrist. But I think that that's something that we can offer to people, no matter maybe what chronic illness or health condition they're experiencing. And it's a huge gift to say, like, do you want me to like look online for some resources for you? Or I found this web page that I think might be helpful to you. Can I send you the link? Because I think that when you're in the midst of any kind of health problem, like you said, when you're in it, it's so hard then to also do what you need to do to get the help. It's like you're just stuck in this place. And I think it's so important, and our healthcare system is so complicated, right? That I think that if we can just say to someone like, well, if I just made a few phone calls even for you, it's not that it takes so much time. It's just can be kind of frustrating and confusing. And it's hard when you're the sick person to then be motivated to do it.
Yeah. And if you're in a situation like where I was, and I was malnourished at that point, I wasn't thinking straight. My mind was not there. So even what might be the smallest, easiest task that somebody else might not even think twice about, for me, it was like lifting a boulder at that point, because I was just so worn down mentally, emotionally, and physically, that I remember reaching out for different therapists or different sites for a nutritionist, and it wasn't a match. It wasn't going to work out, and I would just start crying. I would just break down and start sobbing, because at that point I was just so drained from everything else that it was like, oh, I can't even reach out to one more therapist today. I can't do it today. So it's very difficult, and there are definitely some hurdles when it comes to accessing treatment, and especially when it comes to accessing mental health treatment. And I'm sure that you've seen a lot of that in your research and the work that you've done.
Yeah. And it's just really unfortunate that, I mean, in my opinion, unfortunate as a psychologist, that our healthcare system isn't set up to offer the sort of long-term mental health care that many people need. And it does oftentimes require advocacy for yourself in a way that if you had cancer or you had diabetes, you wouldn't necessarily need to advocate for yourself. If you had something that was sort of a chronic, very or more clear-cut physical condition. But I often tell my students this too from my other health class, but you can't give up. And oftentimes it does pay off to persist. I've seen this in my own life and in helping other people, that, it's hard when you're in the midst and you're at the bottom, right? You kind of hit rock bottom. I'm not saying in those moments that you should summon this kind of energy necessarily, but, if you run out of mental health care treatment, right? That's very common in a lot of our health plans, is like after a certain number of appointments or something, you quote unquote run out. You can often petition that. It doesn't always work, but it sometimes does. And sometimes just being kind of a pain to your insurer can help a lot. And also just talking with, maybe your therapist has some tips, maybe someone, maybe, call your insurance more than one time, get more than one person on the phone. There are also eating disorder treatment centers and groups that offer some scholarships actually. And there are, there are people who can help. It can take a lot of effort, unfortunately, to find them and to figure this out. But I think it's just really important to acknowledge that it's not just you. Sometimes this is not easy. It is not straightforward. The system isn't set up, our healthcare system, for long-term mental health care. And it's worth it to persist, that you can oftentimes end up with the resources that you need. But don't give up, I guess, is what I want people to hear.
Yeah, it's a frustrating process indeed, as I went through it myself, and I've talked to many other people who have experienced the same thing. And the problem with mental health treatment is when the insurance companies and the providers, they say, okay, well, after 30 sessions, we're done covering for the year. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. It's not like you broke your foot or something and it's like, okay, I got to wear this cast for 6 weeks and then have it taken off. There is no timetable when it comes to recovery. It can take years. There are individuals I talk to who are a decade into recovery, and that they're still working with their treatment teams. So there is absolutely no timeline. So it's rough that we live with a system that tries to put a timetable on it.
Yeah, and I think self-advocacy becomes just really important in these circumstances, or asking other people to help you advocate when needed. And we know also that I think there's been a lot of bad things to come, obviously, from the pandemic these last couple of years. One good thing that has come is the turn to more virtual mental health treatment, and some of the research coming out about that so far that I've seen suggests that it can be really effective. So although I think most of us like the idea, if we're doing therapy, of like being in the room with someone, virtual treatment opens up access to a lot of people, and it's just easier to work into your life. I think you had some experience with that because it was already 2020 when you were really looking for treatment. How have you experienced sort of more remote or virtual sorts of care? And do you have any thoughts or advice about that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. My therapist, I've never met him in person. Now, all of our sessions have been done virtually, and it's made it very easy for me because it's made it flexible. I'm able to, hop on my session and then get right back to work if I need to. Pretty much sitting in the same spot. I don't have to worry about a commute or go in and out of an office. And I think for some people that helps, because for a lot of us, we battle social anxiety, and especially for a guy to go to a therapist, sometimes they can feel weak, they can feel inferior, because here they are, publicly admitting that, I need help, sitting in the waiting room or even walking in the door. Well, when it's virtual, that kind of hides it a little bit more. So I think that knocks down one of the barriers right there. And it also it increases the flexibility. And I think too, it probably opens up the schedule for therapists more. I think that it gives them more of an opportunity to serve. So there might even just be more resources available now than there were before, because of this virtual format. In many ways, the pandemic it's been horrible. It's been a rough 2 years, but there's also the silver linings that come out of it. For me, it gave me the opportunity to focus on my own recovery without the outside distractions. I didn't have to worry about the social events, or I didn't have to worry about necessarily going to and from the office every day. So that was time that I was able to spend on my own treatment and on my recovery. And I think that's helped some people. Unfortunately, the pandemic has also, exacerbated the problems. I think that there's a lot more individuals who are battling mental health issues now than there were 2 years ago. But I think too, it has helped us. It's brought more attention to this area, and I think more people are talking about eating disorders and about mental health than ever before.
Yeah, I find that really encouraging, that I think there is just more open discourse. I actually read an article last night in the New York Times saying that there was a recommendation put forth to start screening kids at 8 for anxiety.
Mm.
And I know from my own kids, they're teenagers now, but I know from talking with other parents that there's been a lot of anxiety among young people during this time, right? So 2 years out of our lives as fully formed adults isn't nearly as big a deal as like 2 years in the middle of puberty or something to be kind of holed up or have things go off the rails. But the fact that more kids are anxious, that eating disorder diagnoses have risen, all of that is not good. But the fact that we're acknowledging it, we have, virtual options for people in terms of treatment, that there might be more screening. I do think, like you say, these are some silver linings, and, we just have to hope that then this really persists following the pandemic, and that we can, work to chip away at misperceptions about gender and who is vulnerable and who gets sick. And, do you have any pieces of advice or experiences in terms of your advocacy work in your personal life, and in terms of how you've seen maybe some perceptions change, or things we can do to help people's perceptions about mental illness and gender change?
Yeah, so I think it's so important that we change the narrative, just the narrative when it comes to diet culture and the way that we talk about our bodies, but also the way that we talk about our mental health. We have to be able to realize that health is a holistic thing. It's not just diet, it's not just exercise. And so often what I'll do is I'll ask a group, okay, tell me one thing that comes to mind when I say the word health. And it's always diet or exercise related. Mental health never comes into the equation. Social health, emotional health, none of that's ever talked about. And I think it's so important that we redefine what health is. And it's a little bit of everything. It's mental health, it's physical health. And one of the things that I like to say now is that the strongest guy in the room has nothing to do with how much he can lift. It has to do with how much he can share. And I think that really challenges it right there, because for the longest time, we think that health and strength comes from physical, but it's just as much mental as it is physical. And we need to change that. And I think that there are a lot of men that are now finally starting to speak up. We see it with athletes that are coming forward and celebrities who are talking about it. And I think that goes a long way in changing the narrative. I think back over the last 2 years, the number of individuals who have gone out on record and said, you know what, at one point I was battling body image issues, or I was battling an eating disorder. And that's what we need to see. We need to see more people coming forward and sharing their stories, because everybody's story holds power. Regardless of what obstacles we've overcome in our lives, we all have a powerful story that can help somebody else. So the more we share, I think that's how we go about changing the narrative. That's how we confront those misperceptions or misconceptions that are out there right now. And I'm curious kind of, what ideas you might have in your book when it comes to changing the narrative about boys and body image and eating disorders.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying about sharing stories, and that's part of what I do in the book as well, right? So that I have a lot of factual information throughout my body image books, but then I also do share people's stories. I interview and we work on piecing together how to articulate their experiences, so that we can just normalize what this looks like, what this feels like for people when you're down on yourself, when you're dissatisfied with your body, when you're experiencing a more acute mental health problem. I think it's really important for people to realize that, like, this happens to most of us. This is what it sounds like. This is what it looks like. And of course, the extreme or the extent to which people experience these things varies incredibly, but very few people make it through life without some mental and or physical health problems. We all have our own things that we have to endure. And I think when we normalize it, we talk about it, we share the stories, And we understand that it's not something to be embarrassed or ashamed of. But we can get help. There are options, there are treatments, we can get support. I think that's just such an important piece of this. I also have been doing a lot of press for the book and talking to a lot of people about how important I think it is to really think about how we're conceptualizing masculinity, and for that matter, femininity, and to really become more open-minded about that, right? That if we're raising boys in particular and telling them, to man up or to not be a wimp, or they need to be strong, or, look how fast you run, or, these are the things we say without thinking to boys when they're very young and throughout their childhood. And then we wonder why, when they feel bad about themselves, they go and lift heavy weights. We've basically been telling them for 10 or 15 years of their lives that this is like the antidote to feeling bad about yourself.
Yeah.
So, I think that as a parent, as adults, as teachers, as therapists, as advocates, we need to really challenge how we've conceptualized masculinity and femininity, because there are parts of these conceptualizations that work, and there are parts that very clearly are not conducive to mental health.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important. And just like diet culture, it's the water we swim in. We don't always see that what we're doing could be damaging.
Yeah, totally.
I know we're running low on time though. And I do see a first question in the chat. So one of my students is asking, if boys want to seek treatment or therapy, but they don't know how to find a good therapist that meets their needs, what advice do we have? I feel like that one's better for you, Jason. What advice would you offer?
Yeah, so one of the things I did is, I did the Google search, as my doctor said, and I compiled a list of therapists, and I reached out to them and explained my situation, and I did a lot of screening. It was almost like an interview process where I was asking them, what kind of treatment do they have? What kind of therapy do they offer? What has helped in the past with their clients? And I just wanted to learn as much about them as I could before I started working with them. And I think that that's one of the important things to do. Is it might be messy, it might be difficult to find online, but dig deep. Look for anybody. It doesn't necessarily have to be an eating disorder specialist therapist. It could be, and that would be great if it is. But there are the instances like mine where it was somebody else kind of off the wall, where it was just like we worked together. It was going to fit. So I think that's what I would advise boys out there, is to reach out to multiple therapists and have kind of those initial consultations, and then figure out who's going to work best with you, because that's going to be an individual that you become very close to during treatment and during the recovery process. So you want to make sure that the relationship is a match.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I often have talked to people about that in terms of therapy too, that if I think sometimes it takes at least 1 or 2 sessions with a therapist to know if it's a good fit. But if you're not feeling like you click, if you're not feeling like you really are comfortable, you really like this person, find somebody else. It makes a huge difference, and it's not necessarily personal. It doesn't mean that person's doing anything wrong. It might just not be right for you. It might not really help you. So I think that's super important. So another question in the chat: if you think a sibling has an eating disorder, should you step in essentially, or should you leave it up to the parents and guardians? And I'll take a first stab at that one, but then maybe Jason can jump in too. I think, what I would recommend is, it depends in part on the age of the people involved. And I would probably go to, a parent or guardian, because you want to share the burden, sort of. You want to get their help, right? Get their help to help the person you want to help. And you want to all be on the sort of same page, if at all possible. But if you approach someone, a parent or an aunt or a grandparent or whoever it is, another family member, and they're not getting it or you're not on the same page, then I would say that doesn't mean stop there. I think then you can still have that conversation with the sibling, and I would recommend having it. And again, have it with compassion, with as little judgment as possible, and really try to, just offer support and caring.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing I would add is that I think a lot of times it's situational. It depends on, what that relationship is between the siblings, what the relationship is within the family. Because I could think of some instances where perhaps the individual going through the eating disorder might feel betrayed if the sibling went to the parents before going to them
Right,
first.
true.
So
True.
you don't want them to feel ganged up on either. So it depends on the
Yeah.
circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And also your relationship with, the parent or the other guardian, your relationship with the sibling, what's the history in your family. I mean, there are certainly cases in certain families, unfortunately, where the parents are part of the problem, maybe, and they may not be particularly receptive then to hearing that this seems like a problem that needs a solution. So there's a lot to consider, I guess. But again, it's easiest often to say nothing, but I don't think that's usually the right option. Are there any other questions? I'm looking in the chat. I don't know. My students are in like another building even, so I have no idea if they're just all asleep over there. You guys should like give me some indication that you're not all
We
asleep.
should have had a dance break halfway through to keep everybody awake.
Oh, yeah, or like I don't know, at least like a musical intermission or something.
Yeah, I don't know if they want to hear me sing though. So.
Well, we could just play music.
Oh yeah, okay, that works.
Yeah. I mean, we should keep this in mind if we end up doing it again, which I would be very open for. I think that maybe just an intermission. Yeah, we'll work on that.
All right. Yeah, we'll have that next time, Jillian, I promise.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to just, I guess, start to wrap it up, and then I'll let Jason have the last word. If these topics are of interest to you, I really, really recommend that you get Jason's book. It was, like I said, I really couldn't put it down. I finished it in just a few days, and it was really good, really enlightening. I'm really glad that we got to have this conversation. I hope it was beneficial to everyone listening. And I think you're doing amazing work in advocating for these issues and putting yourself out there. And it's just really inspiring. So thank you.
Well, thank you for everything that you do. And it was as soon as I wrote this book, I was like, okay, what's next? I kind of got that writer's fever, and I was like, I want to focus on boys. I want to talk to the younger population out there, because that's when the seeds were planted for me. That is when the eating disorder began, the insecurities and the body image issues. And then I was talking to somebody, and they recommended connecting with you. And as soon as I heard about being you coming out for boys, I was super excited, because I'm like, this is fantastic. This is so needed, as that young Jason can attest to. It is so badly needed out there. So thank you for everything that you do. And I just want to thank the class and everybody else who joined us today. These are the types of conversations that change the narrative. By us just showing up here today, we're changing the narrative, and we're making a difference. So keep having these conversations, and yeah, I'm excited to see what the future holds.
All right. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Everyone in my class, you get a bathroom break. I'll see you in about 15 minutes as soon as I can run across campus. And Jason, I will send you a link to this video so we can share it to whoever we want to. And I hope that we'll be in touch as we both work on our own advocacy in these areas. And it's just great to have a chance to know you. So thank you.
Yeah, take care. Thanks so much.
All righty. Bye, everyone.